Hi everyone! In today's video, I'll be talking about the latest knight that was just released, Lyre Orphee. Now, Orphee is a very interesting character because he is a silver knight, even though he is right now in a golden arrows banner. But the virtual fact of him being a silver knight means that he can actually be summoned in silver knight fragments. So if you collect 60 fragments, there is a possibility. I think it's slightly lower than other silver knight, but there is that possibility of you being able to summon him. So for this reason, I don't think you should be pulling for him in this banner because golden arrows, as we all know, is a very rare currency for pulling knights, where a silver knight fragment is one of the more common ways of being able to pull a knight. So there's just absolutely makes no sense to waste golden arrows on him when you are able to summon him in a much cheaper fashion. So I will just put this out there so you guys don't make this mistake. But now that you guys know that we should not be summoning him in this manner, I would still like to tell you whether this character is good or not. So now let me go through all of his skills, and I will also talk about kind of what kind of lineup or formation he will be best suited at. So now let's start off with his ultimate. His ultimate is very similar to Comedian June's skill. Basically, he just binds someone for 3.5 seconds, and during that time, neither you or that enemy is able to do anything. Now that enemy do lose health every single second, and I do believe when you are when you are actually binding that person, you are actually recovering health once you unlock level 10 of your clothes. So basically, once again, it's very similar concept to what Comedian June is doing. Now, next skill we have is kind of his signature skill, but basically he put everyone into sleep for 3 seconds. Now that is great on paper because everyone's asleep, so you essentially have this 3 second advantage over them. And this is a looping skill, so you can actually activate this multiple times in battle. Now the only downside, well, kind of downside, is that during those 3 seconds, if you do release an ultimate, then it's very likely that you will be waking them up. And then once they're waking up, even though they have a reduced attacking speed by 100%, but still, they are awake at that point, which means they will be gaining cosmos, etc., and they can use their looping skills, all of those. So it is a somewhat double-edged sword in that sense that you do want to put them onto sleep, but you have to then maybe you want to manually then control your ultimates to decide on whether you want to release them or not. So that's something to bear in mind, but it's still a very good looping skill. Then we have another looping skill. This one is nothing too worth mentioning, but basically just hits three enemy and it reduces their defense by 100% for 5 seconds afterwards. So potentially it could be good in story maps when your enemies have really ridiculous defense, and this is a way of reducing their defense. And lastly, we have a trigger skill, which is basically what under control effects of Orphee, any other control effect will trigger resonance. And what that means is that it will be doing damage to them based on Orphee's attack. And that damage is gonna ignore the target's defense. So once again, ignoring target's defense, that's quite useful, especially in story maps. And that's basically already kind of showing you how you potentially want to build Orphee in a team is that you want to really maximize his resonance skills. So you want to place him alongside with loads of other knights who are also able to inflict control effects, etc. Now moving on to his clothes I don't think is actually anything to really care about. In all honesty, the level 30 is quite nice in some sense. But let's just go through them one by one. First two skills is regarding his ultimate, but basically that says when you're binding someone, you're actually then healing damage, healing your HP at the same time. And then afterwards, now once again, while you're binding that person, you are also immune to all no interruption control effect. And then the last one is when you're binding them, you are not gonna suffer any damage apart from the target of your bind. And if you remember, if you're binding him, then he won't be able to act, so he won't be suffering any damage to you either. So this almost means that it actually converted his ultimate to how many seconds is it? 3.5 second immunity, where you won't be taking any damage at all. So that is quite nice by itself. Um, However, whilst you are not taking any damage, you are not able to do anything either. So I don't actually I have a funny feeling about his clothes. I don't think it's essential, even though the last one sounds very good on paper. I don't actually think it's really worth level 30. So I think you can go casual with his clothes. His constellation, on the other hand, I do think is quite important. Mainly for the max level one, because that basically extends the duration of his looping slumber by another 2 seconds. So if you think about his slumber right now, it's already for 3 seconds. So if you do that, add an extra 2 seconds on top of that, that's a whole 5 seconds where the enemy won't be able to do anything. That is quite ridiculous by itself, and this is a looping skill. So just consider how many times you will be triggering this in a battle. I think this is actually very useful. So I would say probably do whatever you want with his clothes, but for Constellation, you kind of need to max it out with all 9 star points. Now let's talk about some formation ideas for Lyre Orphee. As I mentioned, I do not recommend anyone pulling Orphee using golden arrows, and that's why I don't have him on my account. So in order to demonstrate him, I am going to represent him with another water skill knight, which is Aphrodite. All right. So now I already mentioned, the way you want to build a team around Orphe is you want to bring lots of other control units, because then you'll be able to trigger Orphe's resonance. So that's very nice. Now, if you think about control units, the most famous one will be a Crest Camus, and Crest Camus is actually really good with Orphe, because one thing with Orphe is that you want to put so there are two reasons why Camus is really good with Orphe, first of all. So first of all, Camus is able to freeze everyone at the start of battle for about 4 seconds. Once those 4 seconds have passed, Orphe should be just about ready to trigger his looping slumber. So, well, actually, that means that which don't put everyone into sleep for 5 seconds. Now, I do think there's actually a bit of a gap between when Crash Camus freeze finish and then the slumber kicks in, but it's a very small gap. So you can actually think about, for the first 10 seconds or so of that game, you are able to essentially put the enemies out of action for like a good 9 seconds. So that by itself is already amazing. How you are able to essentially prevent the enemy from doing anything for the first 9 seconds. So that's by itself is already a great reason why you should pair those two up together. Another reason is, as I mentioned, control effects would then resonate with Orphe. And if you think about Crest Camus with Max Constellation, every single normal attack of his is going to freeze the enemy by half a second. So actually, you will be causing resonance with every single normal attack of a Crest Camus, and that once again is also amazing. So a Crest Camus, to me, is a must-have with Lyre Orphee. Now, with the Crest Canvas in, now you have a bit of flexibility as to how you want to build a team, because you can go down potentially ice formation by bringing in, Kraken Isaac, a Crest Hugo, etc., and go for a bit of an ice build. And if you're doing that, that's absolutely fine because they also have control effect to freeze people. So I think that would be a good synergy with Lyre or Fee. Even though in this case, I think the main person you're kind of building around is more kind of a Crest Hugo rather than Light Offie. But this is definitely a very viable um, formation. So I actually think if you are going down like an ice control freezing team, then Light Offie is actually a pretty good addition to that. Now, so we already kind of know what's the standard ice formation. But if you want to build it in a different way, there's another character I really recommend. And that is going to be Gemini Cannon. Now, Gemini Cannon is very interesting because Gemini Cannon has this his meteorite where when he's summoning that meteorite, any single control activated will make a smaller meteorite hit the enemy straight away. And now you have a Crest Camus who's keep on doing control, and also you have Lyre Orphee who is also a control character. And then whenever there's a control, you are triggering both uh, Lyre Orphee's resonance, and you are also triggering Gemini Cannon's meteorite. That's actually going to be a quite considerable amount of damage. So that's why I also think Gemini Cannon is actually a very good pairing here. Another character who is very good pairing is Pandora. I already mentioned this in Pandora's video that Pandora by herself is really great synergy with Gemini Cannon because even though Pandora is forcing everyone to lose HP, every single time when you lose HP, your Gemini Cannon is actually going to get stronger. So, Pandora by itself is really a good synergy with Gemini Cannon, but I also think Pandora has a really good synergy with Lyre Orphee because when you are actually putting everyone into sleep, you have to be careful that your ultimate will be waking them up. So actually, what if you can do damage to them without using ultimate? And that's kind of where Aquarius Chemist comes in with his control, right? Because he is controlling them, and then you are summoning meteorite as well, and then you have the resonance. So you're doing a lot of control without actually, sorry, you are dealing a lot of damage without actually using your ultimate. And also, that's what Pandora is doing with her passive, because you are still making the enemies lose HP, even though you are not actually using any ultimates. So those are actually a really good synergy together. So those four knights are actually highly recommend for them to go together. Now, as for the remaining slots, I think you have a lot of choices here. You can go for a healer. If you want to go for rainbow formation, then you can go for a healer in terms of either Aris Mu or you can go for Hound Astarion. If you don't want to go for rainbow team, then you have even more choices because you can now bring a wind or water knight. For wind, you can potentially bring Misty. For water, you can potentially, well, actually, I wouldn't recommend bringing Athena. But for water, what you can bring instead is Moses. Because once again I already talked about in my video for Pandora, but there's a few knights who go very nicely with Pandora and Gemini core, and Moses is one of them. The other one would be Casa. So once again, you have a rainbow formation there, or you can also go for Chameleon June, who I think is also a very nice and interesting one because Chameleon June and Orphee both will take enemies out of action. So what you have here is actually both of them will be taking one enemy each out of action. So now you only have three enemies on the field. Although, even though you only have three, but once again, you have your Gemini Cannon, who's a powerhouse. You have your Crest Cannons to keep on putting control, and your Pandora, who is constantly eating away HP. So, it's not actually too bad to slow down the pace of the battle with taking two enemies out of the action. On top of that, Chameleon June also have healing effect, and Pandora have healing effect. So that also kind of compensate to the fact that this team as a whole is somewhat fragile. So you do actually need quite a bit of a healing power, I guess, in order to make sure you survive long enough for all those controls to kick in, etc. So overall, I think this is probably a pretty good formation for Lyre Orphee.